So maybe this one, this is a good one for you, Ed. What metrics should big business add to their bottom line to sort of report on resilience?
That's an interesting question. Normally, companies have, major companies, or maybe all companies, have what's called a business continuity plan, a BCP. And that actually is one way of ensuring resilience of the operation of the company. But when we're talking here of resilience, we're actually talking of outside our own company. And I think while we can put a dollar value as a measure, I think the more meaningful part is the number of partnerships we're able to forge. And wherever we operate, the partnership and the programs we have put in place to help the community where we operate achieve a certain level of resilience. You know, that's what's coming off my mind right now.
Yeah.
Just like we have a BCP for our operations in every country, we should also have a resilience program in the community where we operate. So it becomes a table stake.
Stuart, do you have any thoughts on that? I guess sort of a greater sense of transparency or accountability in terms of what progress a company is making, or how much of the budget they're willing to set aside to contribute to resilience, and how successful those initiatives are.
Yep. First of all, I agree with Supano's point earlier that resilience needs to be baked into the operational, the strategic planning side. So I'm a little bit concerned about the idea to add on metrics. I think it's got to be baked into the actual business strategy. So we do report for US businesses on the annual 10K, so that also covers things like material risk. So for example, water, in our case, is a big one. Then it goes through a whole bunch of other metrics, such as around packaging, climate change, energy, sustainable agriculture. But I think your point, Mariam, about increased transparency is a very important one, because it's not just, it's how you do the reporting as well. How do you make it interesting so that it's not just a small subset of people that read this, but we've been experimenting with digital, with social media, to get these to be much more real-time, much more informative, and hopefully a little bit more inspirational to people who read them using social media.
You've been experimenting with
Yes,
that. What's the response been?
Good. It also saves us from doing the thick kind of once a year reporting on paper, to having maybe a smaller paper report with our key metrics, but then constantly updating it, refreshing it on our social media sites. So it's something we're learning about, but I think that's going to be an exciting chapter as we get even more transparent in our reporting.
Supano, interesting question here about, maybe this is a good one for you, because you were speaking about the Norfolk project there, and you've been working on a few different projects quite closely with the government projects that not only contribute to sort of helping people on the ground, but perhaps also increase the efficiency of the government to some extent in figuring out what people need and then delivering on that. And so there's a question here about how we encourage and what are the key, how we encourage and what are the key ingredients for an inclusive partnership and collaboration to promote and become a resilient city.
I think what we have done is approached all of these as partnerships and ecosystems. So if you look at the Norfolk example, and let me tell you how partnership really works out in real life in this example. So we have, let's say, HP providing services, but there are a whole range of other partners. There would be a telecommunications partner, because you would need to, kind of connect everybody. There would be someone who really understood the social welfare system, because they brought that very specialized knowledge. Interestingly, we've also brought in the university, because part of what the analytics that you saw, it's not just a question of connecting the dots, it's also the question of finding the dots to connect, because these are not very obvious. And what we are doing is this relationship of creating or training the next generation of students who would have the ability to do these kind of analysis to not solve problems, but find the problems to solve. The government provides the environment in which the use cases are being found so that the tough problems, they come. We provide the technology as well as the training because we are at the cutting edge of doing that along with the labs. And so it's this tripartite relationship of creating the next generation talent who are working on relevant problems of today with the facilitation and technology help of the other partners is creating this kind of, if you will, self-driving mechanism that's kind of keeping this flywheel spinning at an ever faster pace. And we find that this ecosystem of multiple partners, different perspectives, different timescales is working very well.
And so maybe this is already happening, I don't know, but you in the University of Swansea, you were telling me about energy efficiency on campus. They are designing a new campus there with HP Labs, looking at cutting down on consumption, and you're involved because you have the analytics and the tools to kind of help them with that. And so this is something that is, I don't want to say limited, but concentrated on a university campus. How do you go from that to sort of scaling up and having those sort of energy monitoring data initiatives, or to collect data on sort of city infrastructure?
So I think it's a very interesting point, because we've looked at energy and its usage as a key factor as we look at technology. So if you think about all the things that happen at the back end, whether you make a cell phone call or whether you swipe your credit card, etc., there are large data centers at the back end, things that you don't see, that are processing all these transactions. And the Department of Energy statistics in the US say that those data centers in the planet would consume in the next few years about 4% of the energy usage of the planet as a total. So it's a very, very significant number. And everything that we are doing is to cut down on that consumption, because we look at the life cycle of what we build and how it gets used and the energy consumption of that. So there's a lot of really fantastic work going on in the laboratories and our HP labs in actually radically cutting down energy usage. So the next generation computers that we have today take 80% less power than what was there 2 years back, etc. But part of what we do is work with, say, Swansea, to apply that research in a real-life situation to say, how could we cut down on the building energy usage, and test that lab work to say, what results are we getting? And then that gets distributed to our customers, to the data centers that we build for them, the data centers that we build and use and provide as a service, so that overall, what started as a Swansea project would then get exported to all the work that we do worldwide, and that would have orders of magnitude incremental benefits than what it's doing in Swansea today, because that's just a pilot.
Is that happening?
Yes, absolutely. So if you take the data center in Winard in the UK, because we did it in that region and we located it next to the sea, it actually uses no electricity for cooling. It just uses atmospheric cooling, absolutely. So it is the greenest data center on the planet today.
Now, we have a question here. Maybe, Stuart, you can take this one. As business leaders and executives of your company, in terms of priority, how much or how little is given to protect and care for the environment in relation to gaining profit?
Okay. I think at its best, these types of initiatives are not mutually exclusive. So when we have an environmental initiative on water or energy efficiency, that's good obviously for the environment, but it's also good for our bottom line. It requires less waste, and it saves us money in our operations. So that is a good example of shared value creation. If you look at something like, in our case, our cold drink equipment, when you also design more energy efficient coolers, as we have been doing, to reduce the energy required by 35 to 40%, that not only is good for us, but also our retailers appreciate that in the marketplace. So I think in our way of looking at this space, it's very important to look for those shared value type benefits.
It's important to look for those benefits, but Ed, I guess the point of the question in a way is that, you know, you have these sort of sustainability initiatives, but there's always going to be a limit in terms of how far a company is willing to go, because I guess because of the business model, and you know, you're not going to, you know, I guess you have that dilemma within Shell, don't you, in terms of, you know, the push for clean energy, and obviously a great deal of emphasis on gas, and we know that gas is cleaner than coal, but it is a transition fuel, if you like, to a cleaner future. So does that pose a bit of a dilemma for Shell?
Not really, because as we mentioned earlier, well, first of all, I think we need to start at the core values of Shell. Core values of Shell are honesty, integrity, and respect for people. And that underpins our business principles. Our business principles, we have about 8 of them, and sustainable development is a key element of that. If I may read one of those specific to HSSE, we say here that we have a systematic approach to HSSE management in order to achieve continuous performance improvement. So we continually look for ways to reduce the environmental impact of our operations and to set standards and targets for improvement. Now, while natural gas, excuse me, some people say it's a transition fuel, we don't believe it's a transition fuel, because if you look at the a very long-term view of energy, man started with wood, then we found coal, then we used oil, and then nuclear, gas, etc. All of those fuels are still being used right now. It's just that the mix has become more complex. So we believe that the growth will be coming from renewables, but it's not going to totally displace the fuel like nuclear, like gas. So it's not really a transition fuel. Now, our role is to ensure that whatever fuel we have is something that's used sustainably, and that we have minimal impact on the environment. And of course, we're also into renewables. We have, as I mentioned earlier, biofuels, where we're looking at second generation, where it's not coming from sugarcane per se. So we're not competing with food, because the question always is, in a world where there's so much hunger, why are we converting a food source into fuel? So we are instead converting what we call cellulosic material, so bagasse, material which cannot be used for food. And instead, that's what we're converting to fuel. So I think as technology develops, we will be able to come up with all these things. Showa Shell in Japan actually has a large solar business as well. We have a wind business in the UK. So we see all of these things as part of the evolution of a more complex energy mix, where we are playing our part in ensuring that we don't become overly dependent in one, and that the carbon footprint is kept at a minimum.
And perhaps related to that point, Supano, we have a question here. Is it necessary to use legislation to hasten this resilience advocacy to huge and small companies in the world? So yes, we're talking about projects and initiatives that are underway, but you know, in relation to the last question, maybe because of the business model that companies have, they're only willing to go so far, because you know, obviously things are built a certain way, and they're not going to really do anything to jeopardize profit, if you like. So I mean, is legislation the way forward? Is that the only way to move more quickly?
I have mixed opinions. I think legislations can certainly help, but I do believe that the market determines, because many of these, I mean, you know, do have a financial impact in terms of a better product today, which consumes less power, or has a better supply chain that reflects in a price. So for example, we were part of the Go West movement in China, where a factory was built in Chongqing, a very, very large factory. It's as far away from ports as you can imagine, which was the typical way of moving the equipment. But we now have a train line that takes the equipment from there to Europe. And that is 1/12 the fuel cost of what we would have done elsewhere. So, and that reflects in, the price of the product, how it's made, the ability to create local jobs. So it kind of comes around. Nobody would have had to legislate it. There were incentives given, but it didn't force all the companies to say, you must go west. It was a business decision that we made based on a number of factors that also turned out to be, or the social consideration was massive in arriving at that business decision. So it kind of plays both ways.
Stuart, a question here about population growth itself not being the problem, but the fact that it's all concentrated in urban areas. That's what we've been talking about. How are you committed to bring development to the fringes to help ease concentration in cities that have grown out of control? So I guess an interesting question there about the urban-rural divide. And, we've been speaking a great deal about quality of life and delivering efficient services in the cities. But, there is also a need to look to remote areas, which actually some you've been talking about, with the Raknam project and in Supano in Rajasthan.
Yeah, I think our view on this is that our growth, and as we invest behind the business and the brands, it has to be inclusive. Many of our sustainability projects now are in these more rural environments, because that's where some of these needs, some of these risks, some of these shocks that we've been talking about are most heavily felt. So that has tended to be the focus of our, in this case, water projects in most of our countries around Southeast Asia. The challenge, I think, in an urban setting is to change the mindset. And by that I mean to create much more urgency, much more awareness, much more education, to some of the points this morning, amongst the urban population about why these issues are important and what specifically they can do to make a change. Because these issues are coming, as we've seen, but sometimes it's us in these kind of rooms and these kinds of forums discussing it. It's our job with our companies and with our brands to also, in an inspiring, uplifting way, show and motivate the urban audiences that these issues are coming and we all need to be part of the solution on it. So I think that tends to be a different type of approach between urban and rural.
And going forward, I mean, you were saying a lot of the things that you're focusing on are in rural areas.
Yes.
Do you see that continuing? Because, a lot of the risks that we've been speaking about from climate change and climate adaptation, it is the poorer communities that are the most vulnerable,
yes,
and that are the most at risk, and where you can have the most impact in a way. Do you see more of a concentration in rural areas rather than in the cities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with our water and sanitation programs specifically, those are heavily concentrated on where the need is most prevalent, and that tends to be, again, in very isolated rural communities, so working with government and then NGO partners to make sure that we're looking at those areas first.
So we've only got 1 minute left. Why don't we end on perhaps a more constructive note to get some thoughts from each of you on so much of what we have been speaking about is collaboration across sectors, not just within your industry, with the companies that are part of your industry, but really looking beyond that to those non-traditional partnerships, to think outside the box. What is the one single biggest thing you think we need to see from businesses, from people like yourselves, to sort of engage that much more in that collaboration? Perhaps a final thought from each of you. Supano, you first.
I think in a pragmatic manner, I think it's this ecosystem of not just different kinds of partners, but also cities coming together with their own set of partners to solve problems collectively and share best practices, etc. Because I think cities can also learn from each other and each have their own set of partners, so form these kind of collectives to address issues. I would love to see that happen.
And Ed, maybe just picking up on that note, how can, obviously, you know, Shell and Coca-Cola, you've spoken about projects in a number of different cities in the world. What is the one thing that city leaders can do to get a company like Shell involved, you know, whether it's, I don't know, within the regulatory environment in the city, you know, how do you decide on getting behind a project and the extent of your involvement and sort of which city you're going to be most active in?
Well, I think the first, most important is governance. If we go into a city where we know the leaders practice good governance, then it's very easy for us to collaborate with them because we know that they are there for the good of the community rather than for any other vested interest. And I think what the private sector can offer are systems and processes in terms of analyzing problems, offering solutions as well, without, of course, appearing to be imposing, because we are there to support and not to actually impose on the public sector. So that's where we can come in, and we can also bring other people to collaborate. So networking as well.
Stuart?
Yeah, just to build on that, I fully agree that the private sector has so much to offer beyond just donations of cash. The technology, the ideas, the creativity, branding, communications, in our case, marketing, distribution. So I guess my one thing on this question would be to humbly invite some of the public sector or even NGO partners with whom we work or interested in working with companies like ours to think of companies as beyond donors and moves away from that kind of philanthropic donor mindset to creative partnerships. There are some of our best and most exciting partnerships with WWF or USAID, AID, or even Red Cross. It's been much more creative in the way that we think about partnerships, and I think that's going to be very important going forward.
And how you do that, and we could keep talking about this really, but you guys are going to be hanging around, so yes, you'll be able to ask some more questions maybe a little bit later on. That's it for now. Thank you very much, Suparno, Ed, and Stuart.